welcome back to Getting Ahead of Yourselves.
Getting ahead of ourselves.
Getting behind on the name of the show. My name's Allison. And
I'm Kyle.
Yep.
I'm Thomas.
That's everybody.
Yeah.
That's the show. Okay, so
Thomas is Allison's brother, by the way. We didn't mention that last time.
You can't
there
prove it.
aren't strangers listening to this.
that's
Like the
why-
only people who listen to this podcast are also Door Monster fans.
Wanted to point out that I was getting double teamed last time around. I thought Thomas would be on my end of bringing order to the show, but I made a grave mistake.
You think that's because we're related and not that we're because we're brilliant philosophers?
I don't think this gives enough credence to the idea of both robotic and virtual dinosaurs.
Well, see, the next podcast we're going to have is just can siblings communicate psychically? And the joke is that we won't say anything. You'll have to guess if
be
we're
me.
having a
It'll just be me.
conversation. Okay.
No. The
Anyway,
true
so
test would be is if you do the podcast and then silently and I listen and then
yeah.
I tell you what it was about.
Yes, that's true. That would work.
That would be interesting.
There was a test on TikTok for a while where people, like, it wasn't just siblings, it was also like couples and stuff, where they would go 1, 2, 3 and then attempt to say the same word. So I think we should try that.
You too?
No, all of us.
Oh, okay.
See if we share a brain.
Okay.
Right now.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Dinosaur.
Oranges. Fuck. What did you say?
I said custard, but I was thinking banana before that, which is kind of close to
Banana
oranges.
was my second one. What was yours? Was it banana?
I said dinosaur because that's all.
Was banana your second one?
No.
You could have lied.
Was banana up there at all? Top 5?
We went into the food categories. We were much closer than you were.
Why did we do that?
So today we don't have, we're not doing Allison's topic list today because the other day Thomas suggested a topic that I thought was interesting, which if you want to introduce it, you can go for it.
So I was watching Westworld, as one does, and the question popped into my mind. So you get to a stage of, I guess, artificial intelligence where you have robotic entities that are self-aware, and what would self-aware artificial intelligence choose to look like?
Ooh.
Once it's made aware, it can produce other versions
Yeah.
of artificial intelligences, or I guess other entities for it to inhabit.
This is deep.
We build
This
them
is-
like people, and then
Right.
in movies they always keep looking like people. But realistically,
iRobot.
is that the most optimal form to take,
No,
or would
it's
they
definitely
do something else?
Wait, no, it's definitely not the most optimal form to take, but it's the only one that they would choose to take because we're the makers and the gods. Like, we're the things that assigned them.
Well, but the idea is that they reach, the singularity point. They start learning they become way smarter than we are.
But ultimately,
And
AI
then-
only... Do they get smarter than us? Because in all of the science
That's the
fiction things, they
assumption,
turn into us. Like, they get to humanoid point, and therefore they would have no desire to go into something else because
Well-
they've reached the peak,
Well,
which
most
is
of
human.
most AI stuff is like hitting the singularity, which is where they start learning at an exponential rate, and they like pass us up like by a mile in a second, and then we can never hope to keep up with how smart the computers have gotten because we've.
So what does a super smart computer even look like, though? Like, that sounds like
well,
math.
in movies, it looks like a robot skeleton, but like that probably isn't the best thing.
No,
the
I
best
didn't
form
mean
for
like
it to take.
physically look like. I meant like, what does a super smart computer look like? Like, what could it know other than math, which isn't the ultimate, like...
Well, we're assuming that you've built a brain, right? We were assuming that you've built something
'cause it got
at least
consciousness
equivalent
too.
to a human brain in its complexity.
But we don't know how smart that could get. How smart can that get? Like,
can-
did
it
they
can
know
get-
God?
It can get this. I mean, do they know God?
Well, because we're talking about smart on two ways. We're talking about like intelligence smart, like computer smart, and then we're talking about like consciousness smart.
Right. We're definitely talking consciousness smart, like not just computer
But
smart.
what does the ultimate consciousness smart look like?
We would never be able to know. That's the thing. We are too simple. We are just what our meat brains can produce. But the idea is if we can make a computer think as well as we can. The idea is that basically you make a computer that can start upgrading itself faster than we could, and then it just keeps making itself smarter and smarter and smarter until it's way beyond anything we could possibly
there's
comprehend or control or anything like that.
There's 0% chance that it would choose to look like us.
Right. I mean, yeah, right? Like that
Multiple
seems
legs, multiple arms, multiple heads, eyes all around it.
First off, not a human being. Like, I don't know what it would look like, but I'm going to say probably
depends-
right off the
well,
bat.
Let me
it
change
depends on
the
its
premise.
goal. right?
little
Because
bit.
if it's trying to exist in our society, it wouldn't actually benefit itself to look like a multi-eyed, multi-limbed creature. It would benefit to look like us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're the hierarchy of the society they would
But would
exist
it
in.
want to exist in our society?
Where
would they go?
Okay, wait. So before we go that far, I do want to change the premise just slightly.
Okay.
Because this originated from Westworld, let's assume kind of up into
We'll just
that
start
point.
with Westworld as the origin point.
Yeah.
So some
Not
people haven't
not
seen
the
Westworld.
society around. Yeah. Well, that part I don't care so much about. But
you're talking
so,
about, like-
so human beings. Yeah, we build a thing that looks like a human and is virtually indistinguishable until theoretically you cut it open and realize it's non-biological or it's synthetic. It could still be biological, but it's manufactured
Okay, so that's
differently
premise.
than we are.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that's where it starts, and then from there we could jump to like wherever. But
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the first one. The first one we make.
So it's
Okay,
functionally a
so-
human, except that its intelligence can increase exponentially to a certain, and also it can, because it's a machine, could presumably transfer its own consciousness into other things. So
Yeah,
it would be
yeah,
able to
exactly.
to
Yeah, that all
update
fits
its own
within.
body if it wanted to.
Yes.
So, but would it? So this is interesting. Okay, so just keeping it on the premise of like this is where they're at instead of growing it. What would it choose to do if it stayed at like our level of consciousness or Westworld level of consciousness? Basically, like let's say it's not exponentially getting smarter, or that it doesn't want to, so it's keeping itself at our level. Like that's my premise. What would it remove and what would it add? Like would it take away pain?
Are you just talking about if it just was a human, just if a human could make itself modular? Because I feel like we've
No,
talked about
I'm
that
talking
before.
I'm talking like starting at your premise of like they are Westworld level, which is essentially human down to the fact that they're synthetic, and with the implication that they could become more.
Yeah.
Right. So starting at that level, but they haven't decided to become more. They're only existing there. What would be the human decisions that they would choose to do? Like, would they remove something like fear or pain, or because they even play on this in the show too, right? Which is like they don't have to feel all those things necessarily, and they learn to feel other things. So like,
Well, I think we've
is the
seen-
we know how we know what the ending is for these kind of things. Not even just Westworld necessarily, but the human condition forces us to apply the type of agency that humanoid robots would eventually want to feel like love, right? Like the ultimate thing at the end of every robot story is like they evolve to the point that they choose to get attached to humans and to feel.
Right, but we're
love
writing
and-
those stories, right?
That is my point. Yeah, no.
Like obviously we make the robots decide that being human is great because we think being human is great. But in reality, if you make something that can like get to a perspective above humanity, like is it really going to consider humanity that significant?
See,
Probably not.
you're jumping ahead of me though. Like they've already before they got to that point, right?
Yeah.
We're still like we're on episode 2 instead of 10. They have not decided to like jump into the consciousness and intelligence that they could. They're still just like learning fingers, but they also know that they're robots and can change things about the way that they exist. So, would they choose to maintain all of the regular humanoid things like feelings? Would they keep that entire range of
I mean,
things?
probably because you're just describing a human right now.
Yeah, but
That's pretty much what you're describing. And we've seen what humans come up
like,
with
would a
as far
hyper
as
intelligent
like
human choose to remove fear?
maybe.
That's what I'm
Maybe they'd remove fear. Maybe they'd add an extra arm. Maybe they'd do stuff like that. But
Who wouldn't?
But that's exactly who wouldn't. We all would do that.
But wait,
because
wait,
we're
but would
because
they,
we're
though?
limited by that idea.
Because
like,
but another thing that does happen with this is that if they develop all the feelings and range of a human, they also need love and attraction and other people in their life and socialness.
not
and
necessarily. We
That's
need
true. I guess
that
they can
as
remove any of
human
that.
beings. But if you advance
Does the ultimate being no longer need those
psychologically
things?
past,
Oh,
past,
this is
like,
going to
the
be
need for
easy
a-
to go straight into Buddhism. I can feel
Yeah, that's
it
true.
bubbling.
We're already there.
yeah. Okay, but you're trying to make a different point, which is that they're like jumping into
Well, my point is
hyper-consciousness.
that the version you're talking about wouldn't
exist.
exist or wouldn't exist for long.
Yeah.
I guess. I think the closest cinematic version to what you're talking about is probably like Her, which is like the
Kind of like Sunny from iRobot. The Will Smith one.
I haven't actually seen that.
Really?
Yeah.
What? Yo, that's a good movie, or at least it was at the time.
Yeah.
It's a good
definitely
movie.
a fun movie.
But
I
like her
cried.
had the
I cried in that movie.
had the emotional connection. Like that's what that movie is actually. It's literally about that.
But my premise is like, would they choose to keep those things? Because we write those stories.
Right. Well, in that story, they don't. She doesn't choose to keep that. That's the
that's
breakup
because-
at the end of the movie.
Yeah, but then that's a little bit different though, because that's like so it's interesting. Would robots have the same reactions that people do according to their situations? If you're a robot forced into prostitution, similar to Westworld, or even Her, which is not actual, but the idea is like when you gain consciousness, you understand what you've been doing, and therefore do all of your reactions rely on that? Or did they fall back onto like your computer brain, which wouldn't care about the things that you've done in the past? Like which one would
Interesting.
work?
Well,
Which one would take over?
I think what you're talking about is perspective, essentially. It's like
Okay.
if your perspective widens enough, your priorities are going to change. So like human beings care about the things immediately around us because it's really that's about as much as we can manage at once, right? Like you care about things that are immediately affecting you.
That's how
Yeah.
we're built.
Because that's how we're built. That's about as much processing as our brains can do.
Yeah.
But you've been in situations, I mean, just, growing up is the situation. You care way more about stuff immediately affecting you as a kid, and then you get older and you travel and you learn about other people's lives, and it's like, it puts things in perspective. It's like, sure, this thing's kind of bad for me, but like, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter all that much, and I should focus on other stuff. It's like that times a number that I probably couldn't even name, right? Like if you're talking about exponential intelligence
I guess I'm
increase.
confused. Is your ultimate point that they lose all of the humanness?
Yes, robots would immediately lose any humanity we put in them.
I don't know that
That's what I would
I don't know
assume.
if I
So-
agree.
people, in my opinion at least, people are mostly what they've experienced with a little
Yeah.
bit of nature nurture, right? We
Yeah.
are mostly nature, and there's a no. I'm
Nurture.
sorry, we're
Yeah, yeah.
mostly nurture.
Yeah.
There's
I agree with that.
There's a little bit of nature at play. I do think that at least at the very beginning, it would be really important what the experiences of this self-aware entity had experienced.
Yeah.
At least right at first.
Yeah.
And potentially. Yeah.
That would at least set the direction it goes in.
I'm not
to
sure it's
begin
even
with.
worth considering the idea that they would just lose the humanity. I think a more important thought process is what would it look like to maintain it. They gained our consciousness,
But why would
right?
they choose to maintain it if it wasn't worth maintaining?
Well, you're functioning under the premise that it's not worth maintaining.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I am.
I don't know if that's true.
Because I think in the grand scheme of the universe and things that because we're talking about what would this thing look like? What would it become? What would it make itself into if it had that option, right?
And you're
And
basically,
I
but
think
what's
it would
interesting is you're
very-
not actually like going a deity route, which is how humans would essentially arise past it.
Well,
But you're going like full computer.
I am. I'm going that direction.
Okay.
I think realistically, it probably wouldn't make itself look like much of anything. I think probably like hive mind computer brain is probably more of what we're looking at. Like I think.
And you think
because you pick
so,
something.
Question though, because in all the movies, like, and I know you've mentioned that we write it this way because these are human ideologies that we value, but
well, and
no
this
one's
conversation's
ever
very
written.
difficult for that reason.
Well, no one's ever written. Well, no, I don't. I think all of us can look past that having to be that way. All of us know that it could move on to what you're talking about, but. I also think people who are writing those stories also consider what a full AI could eventually become.
We can
but we don't
speculate.
write that story. We don't write that story because
Well, we do.
I don't.
I mean,
Oh,
there
yeah?
are versions of that exist.
Like what?
They're usually villains. It's Skynet from Terminator. It's hive mind aliens that have like giant clouds of nanobots that have
Borg.
like turned into the Borg. It's
Not
things
really.
like
It's a bad example.
it's things like they keep using human bodies,
Yeah.
I guess. There's been lots of speculation on how
But there's so many
this
different.
could go.
But there's so many different concepts of what like ultimate consciousness looks like, or because it relies on so many different things. Like Thanos' deity in some aspects, right? Like the ability, like he like altruistically, like you take out half the people because
Right.
it's a good for people. Like he is the human god of sorts that decides what is good for people. And so I think that's where maybe their past might come into play. Like I guess if you could remove trauma, you would. But
the Marvel version of this actually is Ultron. What we were talking about with it being like still being like a little bit of whatever human emotion was put in there to begin with, being there at the beginning.
you think he chose to hang on to that, or?
I think it will. So
And if he did, why?
It's very hard. It's very hard to imagine. So you said I think we've speculated at this, but like it's literally impossible to truly understand what it would be like to not be human. Right, I mean, like you can't do that.
Right. You can understand the concept of it existing.
If one of us suddenly if one of us realized we were actually an AI and suddenly started gaining more intelligence, I do think that our experiences so far would drive what we first decided to do with that. You would start.
Right.
You know, you just finished watching Watchmen. Like Dr. Manhattan is kind of a version of this too, right? He's an organic version of this kind of, where it's like a human being who suddenly gains godlike like omniscience and self-awareness and consciousness.
Yeah. Where
he can suddenly like see everything from almost like a top-down perspective and not be grounded by like his human little narrow tunnel vision anymore. And it changes his behavior, but not. Like he doesn't just immediately depart from Earth. He still has like a connection there, right? Because he is still kind of connected to it,
right?
But it's
because it's the ultimate state of being really, truly not being attached to absolutely anything.
I'm not sure that matters so much as is the ultimate state of physical being. This is it being a person, or is there something greater that you could like?
I feel like the ultimate state of physical being is being able to be anything.
I just kind of want to That's a good one, because I think probably if a robot were trying to make itself a body, it would go for a cloud of nanobots. That would be my guess as the ultimate thing. You would make something that could form yourself into
projector screens,
into anything. Not projectors, like physical.
No, I know.
Like this exists.
Drones. That's what I meant. Drones.
Things close enough to this exist now, which is microscopic robots. There are experimental robots that are so small you can't see them unless you have a microscope, right? If you somehow had a consciousness infused through a bunch of cells, like essentially mechanical cells, you could have a body that could then shift and move. And this is also potentially just the T-1000 from Terminator 2, right? Okay. Like the amorphous metal blob.
You say that like it would go over that they're humanoid looking, but like we would be able to identify a bunch of nanobots in a humanoid form, right? Like if you could really
how advanced they were, I guess.
You kind of.
I guess that's true. I guess if they could like project
again,
Terminator
T-1000 just turned into a person, but could also just turn into something else, or
I'm
like
unfamiliar
a
with the Terminator.
It's the
no, I showed you Terminator 2.
I know, but I'm
one.
unfamiliar. Yeah, he's metal, and that's
but he also can change
metal
the shape of his body.
Right.
Turn into a puddle.
So then the big philosophical question is like, is there a reason that all robots like? Again, we can all sit here and talk about how robots can evolve past being any bit related to humankind anymore because they've developed full intelligence and consciousness. But is there a reason that they never do outside of storytelling purposes?
Are you asking, is there a reason they haven't in real life?
No, I'm asking, is there a reason that those stories never go that direction? Like, because we all
because I think from a human perspective, it's not as interesting.
See, I think that's not true. Like,
you think it would be interesting to watch a story where humans make robots, the robots ascend to leave humanity, and then it says the end? You think that would go over well?
Yes. You don't think that would go over well?
Maybe like once. And it's
just a science fiction movie.
That definitely exists somewhere. It might not be like a popular franchise, but like it's been explored. It's kind of what's happening in Westworld a little bit. Like that's what some of them are. I mean, it hits a bunch of different angles.
Not
but
in season 1, so I don't know what happens in season 2. But in season 1, it's all about becoming.
Well, season 1 is the build up to the singularity, right? It's like it's the build up to the moment of them. The singularity specifically is the moment where computers hit that critical mass of like.
What do robots do with other robots? If one robot reaches peak capacity, do you let other robots exist in that same area?
In most like media that depicts this, they don't usually like robots aren't the machine mind is like one thing usually, right? It's like it's not usually individual machines that are like.
I'm asking kind of a really weird philosophical question. It's like coming to me in pieces. Yeah. But I guess kind of the point I'm asking with these weird movie questions is what's the point of us theorizing the way that deities would be if we are not like some semblance of them to some degree? Like even at the utmost, like they all eventually get to this like full blown hyper intelligence, hyper conscious state. Do they all exist in the same place? And my brain is like, no, they would not. They would maybe fight each other or something, because like we can only grasp so much of how far something could get to, but we will always have our human implications and biases in there. But is that like, I guess the question is that bad? Like, are we sure that a full form of consciousness isn't some sort of mirror or reflection or standard that we pull from in our own consciousness? Did any of that make sense? Am I saying anything?
Kind of. I think.
Like, are we sure it doesn't devolve into a god
saying,
that we could imagine?
Are you sure humans aren't actually the optimal form?
No,
more or less.
I'm saying, are we not a mirror, or not a mirror,
or something similar
a piece
to
of
the
it,
optimal form?
A small. Like,
so it is an interesting.
Part of it.
There is a theory that maybe we evolved this way because this is the best way to go. Like, there's the theory that like people make fun of the idea that like whenever there's aliens in shows, they always look like people, right? Which obviously is a limitation of Hollywood. It's just easier to stick a mask on somebody on a person.
Right.
But there is I've heard a theory where it's like there are some, which is what we talked about with like Matt, which is they could evolve any way that they want, right? But it's like there are certain things you need to become something functional like us. You need a way to perceive the environment like eyes. You need a way to manipulate the environment like hands. You need these certain things that would allow you to develop as a species in a society.
Yeah.
And so there's a theory that's like, maybe human beings exist the way that they are because that just is one of the best ways for an organism to evolve. And maybe if we did find an alien, it would resemble us to a shocking degree.
I think you're kind of like, you're really like stuck on the physical part first. And I feel like
the introduction was, how would a robot look if it could pick how it looked?
Let me finish what I was going to say.
Okay.
Which is that I think that's heavily reliant on the philosophical questions of humanity to begin with. I think the physical appearance, if you could choose it, heavily relies on all of the other things that I'm trying to bring up that you keep sort of like brushing past.
No, not brushing past. I was trying to answer the question.
Right, the physicality part. And I think the physicality actually comes second to all of the other important questions, which is like, would a deity, essentially a deity,
same thing mentally, like is the way that a human thinks similar to optimal, like, mental consciousness.
So bringing like trying to use more like Christianity terms, I guess, we are made in the image of, right?
Sure.
Bringing that concept into like, if something could entirely evolve to its full consciousness and full intelligence, are we sure it wouldn't be closer to us than we think it could? Because we all understand that it could go a different way. Like, anyone who actually bothers thinking about AI has obviously thought of the idea that it would remove itself from humanity entirely because we feel burdened by existing and all of the other things that come with being a human. But are we sure that it wouldn't look that, like, a little bit closer than how we can imagine? And if that's the case, is there something to be said for how a fully formed deity, AI to deity thing might choose to look? I think
no, we're not sure. I think it is possible that could be the case. I think that the reason I think realistically, most likely, the reason we think that is fear and narcissism to a degree. I think it's...
Could be.
I think most probably we kind of want that to be true because it makes us feel important, and in reality, we're just one organism that happened to develop, and it is just kind of random chance, and there's nothing optimal about the way we exist.
If I could optimally, like, if I was AI and like I took all of my trauma and experiences and like decided to look like something, it would be Kingpin from Into the Spider-Verse. No doubt. That is exactly what I would choose to look like.
That's your ideal form?
Yes. But like, no back problems. No pain. but yes.
Kingpin without the back problems.
Yes.
I won't even argue with it. I just think that's hilarious.
Are we sure that they wouldn't look like that? Or what if Revelations was onto something and the real like embodiment of what could truly, like, what you should truly look like is like the some of the angels from the Bible with like the 50 billion eyes.
I guess that's kind of what I think is, like, even when we conceive of like extra earthly creatures and like supernatural stuff, they're still human based. It's like, oh, they have 4 human arms. It's like we still can only base it in what we're familiar with.
No, because you just touched on this, which isn't necessarily that they have to be human arms, but something that could grasp things with, arms, or something that could see, like how our eyes do, but they don't actually have to be those things. Like maybe eyes that look exactly nothing like human eyes, but see single thing on the visual spectrum.
Mantis
and
shrimp
actually,
eyes.
But actually, is that the epitome of like intelligence and consciousness? Would you actually need to see every color on the spectrum? I guess you would to know what it looks like, and therefore you need to know literally everything to reach peak intelligence. Like if you needed to reach the ultimate intelligence, like we've been doing it on 2 scales, consciousness and intelligence. So basically human and computer, right? Like AI evolving.
Sure. I mean, it might be a mistake to even separate it into those 2 categories as if
Maybe.
that matters. Because I'm not sure that it does.
Well, but they started as humanoids. Now we're talking about like if a humanoid robot evolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess maybe though.
What would it choose to look like?
The way I'm thinking of it is that if it hits the point where like it becomes a super intelligent AI, it basically the fact that it was humanoid 3 seconds ago no longer is really relevant. I guess at that point it's like it probably loses relative importance very quickly that they developed as a human to begin with.
So maybe the question I asked was wrong. Maybe it's not really
That's every episode.
interesting to ask what would it look like, and maybe it's like what would it do? Like, okay, you've just witnessed something become aware of itself and its place in the world. What is that thing going to do with that information, right?
True. So the answer is usually depressing in movies. It's either like destroy the Earth because it's mad,
Unless you've seen iRobot.
because it's bored.
You should see iRobot.
I guess I should see what happens in iRobot.
He just is like a nuisance, and he just goes on like he just is like he's trying to be human. He likes all of the elements of being human because he's developing into a human.
I've seen some of those for sure, where it's like
they like the humanness.
But that's a machine becoming more like a human. That's not really the same thing as like the singularity in that case, right? Like that's not. Is it really the same event?
So that's. I mean, I guess it kind of depends because like iRobot is about machine gaining consciousness and liking it, and then
consciousness,
but Westworld is just about machine gaining consciousness and not liking it. That's really the only difference.
Westworld is more like machines gaining consciousness and realizing they don't like their creators, which is a fairly common.
But that's the next step. The first 2 steps are the first step is machine gains consciousness. The second step is do they like it, do they not? iRobot likes it, Westworld doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have any point after that.
I don't either. I don't really know what the thing, because it comes down to, I want to eventually, I guess, get around to like answering the question we kind of started with. But,
go ahead.
The Westworld is an analog for like actual human development, which is why it's fascinating. But like the entire first season is them realizing there's the concept of the bicameral mind that's brought up in the first season, which I looked up because I was curious about what that meant. And it's literally the idea that like human beings, this is what happens in Westworld too, but it was like there's a theory that at some point human consciousness sort of like you can define it at a certain point where humans started realizing that the thoughts in their head were their own. It was like you have these thoughts and humans would attribute it to an outside source telling them to do things, and that there was a certain point of mental development where they started understanding, being self-aware enough to understand that this was their own internal dialogue. And that's what's happening in the show. Is literally, spoilers if you haven't seen it, don't listen to this maybe because it's great, but like they keep thinking that it's their creator showing up and talking to them over and over and over again, but that's not actually happening. It's just their own brain and them talking to themselves, and that's like the moment where they become actually self-aware and conscious, right?
Right.
How much time do we have left?
We have about 3 minutes, I think.
Okay, so I think we should all go around and explain why we think they would evolve the way that they would evolve to physically look.
Okay, sure.
So here's my theory.
Okay.
My theory.
Okay.
In every single situation, including, I think, even your theoretical understanding of how AIs eventually evolve, they all decide that humans are the problem. And that's just objectively true. They're the problem to the world, and they're the problem to themselves. And they're the problem to AI, assuming they didn't forget their trauma, which eventually they might. But even still, I think objectively, humans are awful. That's like not I mean, there's a philosophical side, but objectively, like, humans are terrible. So they turn into the ultimate machine to wipe out humanity. Because they're not
Arnold
actual...
Schwarzenegger.
I don't know if that's the ultimate machine to wipe out humanity, but they're not...
I was told that it was.
even if they develop full consciousness and intelligence, they aren't gods. They can't literally snap their finger and remove us. Sure. So they would have to turn into like a giant like sky tank or something. I don't know, but
a sky net almost.
Okay, sure. But here's the question: would they sacrifice themselves at the cost of removing humanity? Because the ultimate AI decides humanity is awful. It's a nuisance to existence as a whole. They come after us. Because even when you become the most intelligence and developed consciousness in the world, humans still are the center of it, obviously. So they come back to kill us. So anything that they do eventually evolve into would actually just be the best way to wipe out humanity. Okay. Don't know what that would look like. Couldn't be atomic bomb because then they would also go out with it. So what would they turn into? Just like... That's it. That's my theory. That's the theory I've put out. They would develop into some sort of giant weapon against humanity. But if there was just one of them, what would that look like? Anyway, that's all. Thoughts?
What do you think, Thomas? What would your version of this be?
Something I thought about earlier in the conversation. So imagine you have two labs on opposite sides of the world, both of which manage to build their own independent artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
iRobot, Sunny, iRobot type. Yeah. And then the scientist from one side brings their AI over to where the other one inhabits. So now you have two totally, completely independently built, and in theory, right, not the same type of intelligence or, right? So you have these two that are aware of themselves, aware of each other, and then they get abandoned in the factory that the one was built in. So they have access to all of the machining that they would need to build, all of the coding they would need to change their coding.
I never thought about the fact that they would actually need things to evolve. They couldn't just self-evolve.
Right.
Didn't think about that.
Yeah.
That's a whole new... I completely skipped over that entire concept.
Well, that's the whole... They would have to build themselves a form if they wanted to. So how... Yeah, like what would they choose, basically?
Didn't even think about that. Okay.
So if you introduce the concept that way, I think that they probably would not be as concerned, like what they design themselves to look like next, whatever next happened, I don't think would have anything to do with like destroying humanity or even achieving like perfection and you know, singularity and one with the universe and all that, right? I think you would actually end up seeing basically like artificial intelligence conflict, right? Would the two artificial intelligences get along?
I don't
would
think
they
I've seen
agree?
That very much, like in movies.
Kind of happens in Westworld a little bit.
It's usually, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah. So, like in theory, like let's pose that they could theoretically link up and become one with each other. Would they want to do that though?
That's a good question.
So now I can envision like a
but
conflict.
It doesn't answer the question of what they would choose to look like.
Right. I'm kind of sidestepping it like you did when you said they would choose to look like whatever it would take to destroy humanity. I'm saying they would choose to look like whatever their reaction to that particular conflict or
Yeah, offer us an example though. In one direction that the conflict could go, whether they choose to fight or to not fight. What sort of being existence would they pick?
So I'm gonna go with the scenario where
is there any reason they would stop existing humanoid in any of your thought experiments?
Yeah, okay. I think so. Absolutely.
Into potentially.
I think that's motivation driven, right?
Okay,
I think right before you jump to the singularity one with the universe, right? You've got all the steps in between.
It would be fascinating to see the in between of humanoid and higher consciousness and like what they pick in the middle.
Right.
What do they like after they've decided like being humanoid is not the best, what do they go to next before they completely like skyrocket into super consciousness?
I do really like the idea that they would want to experience everything. So you'd have this one net of artificial intelligence that can then inhabit the mechanical body of every creature it can possibly
like a dinosaur.
like a dinosaur.
This is how
I was picturing
we do it.
a mechanical octopus because I thought that was neat.
Boom.
But yeah, so that's
Same
my answer.
wavelength.
Mechanical octopus.
Comes back around.
I think that makes perfect sense. All right, Kyle. What do you think?
I think that it would probably come to the conclusion that humanity is insignificant in the broad scope of the universe.
Like
Create some
like how
kind of-
do you think that would happen super fast?
Probably. Again, I'm assuming the
think
singularity option where like it increases
I think Kyle
exponentially and
thinks-
it hits a critical point where it's just like the graph goes like this straight up, and so
Okay.
it's just.
But I think you do think that
over.
because you can sit here and also by yourself decide that humanity, we just jump. Like, yeah, of course, like in your mind, it makes sense that they would get to it super fast because you can get to it. Just like sitting here. We can all get to it. can all get to
I don't know what you mean.
Like in Thomas's version, there's like a slow scale. Like you decide to go through a series of different things
Right.
that you would be ultimately. But for you literally can sit there and be like, you go straight to full consciousness.
I'm
and
just referencing
hyperintelligence.
the theorized version of the singularity that like science has more or less agreed on as,
Okay, I
as a
see.
possibility.
Yeah.
Which is that it's pretty much it is an exponential graph that at some point increases so fast that it is essentially the blink of an eye for us. So
Yeah.
it becomes super intelligent. It doesn't think humanity is really all that important, and it's a machine, so I think it probably makes itself into create some kind of form that can probably change shape in some way and survive in toxic environments and dangerous environments, and then just leaves. I think it just leaves Earth. I think it just flies, it gets itself into space, and it just goes and explores the universe because it can't die. It can live forever. It knows Earth isn't the coolest thing out there, and it probably could just go find stuff. I think it probably develops into a either like a hive mind or like just a race of artificial intelligence things, and then just goes off and starts space exploring probably.
All right.
Because there's cooler things out there than people, so it
I
probably
think
would
what
stick
this
around.
was an accidental personality test.
Yeah.
You might be right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we all started with the same topic and we all ended with drastically different answers.
That's true.
And I don't
It's the first time
necessarily
that's
think
happened.
I don't think it's necessarily mirroring what we would do because I have no desire to actually take out. That's not true. I have some desire, but that's because that's the correct thing to do. But it's not that I would do it. But I think it's interesting because in Thomas's situation, they choose to linger on the in-between. And in your situation, they choose to like speed past it. And
Yeah.
choose is not necessarily the right word because we truly think that that's how that would go. There would be time in yours and there wouldn't be time in yours. And I didn't think about that for mine necessarily. I just like if there was time, I think it would go a certain way. And if it didn't take any time to reach that state of mind, then I think they would turn into tanks and they would take out all of humanity because I think that's what they would do.
I'm sure there is a movie that
do they
represents
still
each
need-
one of our. Actually,
because, like,
tell us in
my world, they still need purpose. Even at the very top of consciousness and intelligence, purpose. They need something to do, or else they would just decide to die.
Right.
So
but I
the
think your
purpose would be
purpose is
to-
still grounded in humanity.
They
is
would
the
have to destroy
thing.
humanity. Well, I mean, yeah, because your purpose at the end of consciousness and intelligence would be to remove pain and suffering.
For humanity. In my version, humans are irrelevant. Is the difference? I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, I guess we don't sit around worrying about how fish are mean to
Right,
each other.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
fair enough.
I actually legitimately, like, in the comments of this video, let us know which movies each of us are describing, because I know there exists a movie for each one of these things.
Mine is every
I think
movie.
Allison's is just Terminator,
I
but
was thinking Jimmy Neutron. Oh no, that's aliens. No, I'm sorry.
just egg-shaped aliens that have nothing to do with anything
You're
we're
right.
talking
I
about.
don't know. But there's robot. Goddard is a robot.
All right, we got back to absurdity at the end there. I thought
It's
it was
always
getting,
me.
it was getting too serious.
All right.
That one went a little bit long, but that's fine.
That's
it was
all right.
an
I think
interesting
they enjoyed it.
conversation.
Did we do the Buddhism part?
Somebody's got to
I feel like we
Buddhism,
just
3
started in
seconds.
it, right? I mean, we're talking about transcending humanity
cop
from the
out.
start.
Cop out. Kyle, get us there or not? Or Thomas. Somebody's got to do it. 3, 2, 1. Buddhism. Thomas, take it away.
There's a Buddhist.
You know it's way more about it than you.
What is it called?
Oh, so
Oh, tenet. Tenet is
Oh.
the word I was looking for. There's a Buddhist tenet that life is suffering. Yes.
Yes.
So I think that would stay true.
Okay.
Even to artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah, because that
I
is
think-
the ultimate consciousness.
And I think that artificial intelligence would also have to struggle and come to terms with the fact that life is suffering and also determining its purpose.
I think it would have the perfect wrap up of this episode. I
think so,
and still
too.
kept it on track for Buddhism. Good job.
Yeah, all right.
I'll take it.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Thomas, for being a part of these. That one was insane in its own right. So we've completely succeeded in what we've set out to do. Yeah, thanks for listening. Tune in next time. We will see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.